Yes, it's me, Mike Stone, and this is the Backseat Driver Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Gas Shocks, home of the 116 Trophy and 120 Coupe Cup. Hoddy Tyres, find the best tyres for your vehicle, supplying all the top brands to keep you covered in every season and every condition. Tarox Brakes, the art of slowing down, precision engineered in Italy for ultimate performance, and Specialised Automotive Services, specialists in high quality automotive maintenance and classic car restoration. You can find the details of all our proud sponsors for this episode in the show notes. The other week, Rebecca Leopard, who represents Evero Publishing, sent me another unusual book in this instance, and I'll explain why in a moment. It's written by a man, Rob Young, who claims he's not a writer. So he's written a book. Apparently it's his second book. But Special Brew, the story of the Southern African Formula One and Libra specials. It's a subject I'll hold my hand up and say I know very little about, apart from Kyalami and the East African Safari rallies. I knew very little about racing in Africa, which is why I'm delighted to welcome Rob Young to the Backseat Driver. Rob, welcome.
Thank you. Pleased to be with you, Mark.
How did this book come about? Because, I mean, it's like I said, people like yourself who know about the racing in South Africa must be very thin on the ground.
There are a few dedicated historians about, not many left, but we have a rich racing history here. Before World War II, the Italian teams, Maserati, and strong privateers came to Africa and raced, as well as the Auto Union cars driven by Rosemeyer and von Delius.
Yeah.
So I've always been interested in racing since I was a little boy. Fortunately, my father took me to some of the Grand Prix. And I don't know, I must have been a bit of a collector, programs and whatever. And these particular cars, when our local chaps were unable to buy a racing car because they were too expensive or the factories didn't want to sell them, they had to build their own. And over the years, I collected all this information. And as I had got to know a lot of these drivers and builders, I put it all together. And then one day I decided to compile this book. Fortunately, Gordon Murray, the famous designer, was a good friend of mine, and he encouraged me to go ahead and have it published. So that's where we are.
Now, the one thing, and you mentioned it, is the factories, the manufacturers of racing cars, didn't seem at times overly keen to supply cars to South Africa, or they made them so expensive that, I mean, it really is, as the name suggests, Special Brew, the South Africans' ability to build successful racing cars in the good old Ken Tyrrell tradition of in their garage round the back. I mean, as you say in the book, when some of the cars like the Brabhams appeared and the Lotuses came over to race with people like Sterling Moss, etc., behind their wheels, the Africans, South Africans, with no compunction whatsoever, got their tape measures out, measured them, and more or less built replicas of some of the famous racing cars, didn't they?
Yes, that's partly true. The thing is, people don't understand the rudimentary facilities and lack of, what should I say, equipment that these fellows had to create what they did. And some of these cars were very, very good. During that era, the works teams used to visit at year end for the Grand Prix. We had about 3 or 4 Grand Prix in different parts of the country within like a month. And a lot of the teams seek seek to sell their, what can I say, last year's model to the local drivers in some cases.
Yeah.
But then, of course, there was money involved. Some of the chaps obviously did not have that money, so they decided to build their own.
Now, the interesting thing is, I mean, you look at one guy who, absolutely unbelievable, decided at a young age to hike his way over to England via Marseille and everything else. Just knocked on Colin Chapman's door, Peter de Klerk, and suddenly got a job. I mean, it took him God knows how long to get from South Africa to England, as I heard, via Marseille, working on the ship. And he was absolutely brilliant, wasn't he?
Yeah, I knew Peter very well, and he was brilliant. His ideas were fantastic. The things he did were very clever, and his attention to detail, unbelievable. He had no money to speak of, and as I said in the book, in those days they bought cigarettes in ones instead of a packet of 20. But somehow they did it, and Peter ended up, he drove for Porsche at Le Mans, came sixth, drove for the Aston Martin Lola team with I think Chris Irwin was his partner, John Surtees was in the other thing. So he was a top-class driver in his own right.
And the one thing, as you mentioned in the book, when he eventually, after a full season working for Colin Chapman and Lotus, when he returned to Africa and started to build, I mean, it was where they sourced, people like Peter sourced their parts from. I mean, he even used some of the airframe from an old Tiger Moth. I get the feeling no scrapyard and no scrap car was safe from the attentions of the race car builders.
That's right. They often couldn't get the parts they required, so they made them. And in fact, the one car, the Assegai, he couldn't come across or afford rear uprights. So they fabricated themselves, and that car still races quite successfully in historics in Europe.
Yeah. Because that's one question that has to be asked before we carry on. How many of these home-built specials still survive?
Right. One of the cars, the Meteor, that was built by a real enthusiast in his garage, that races in Europe, and in fact I heard it had a big crash at Goodwood on Easter Monday. Assegai has participated at Monaco and several other international circuits. The LDS cars, of which probably 10 or so were built, at least 2 are running in Britain. The Porsche of Bill Jennings, Porsche Special, which looks like a 718.
Yeah.
That is being revived at the moment. It's not a running car. And the Heron, that's a well-known historic competitor. That's just off the top of my head.
Yeah.
The Alpha Special, the Klerk's famous car, I know was at Hall and Hall at one time. Whether they finished it, I don't know. And the Cooper Special of Van der Favre, which was what they call a T43 today, that is in Norway or Sweden or Denmark, somewhere there. So a lot of these cars are around still. Sadly, some of them were converted to sports cars or got obsolete when the 3-litre formula came about.
Now, one thing you mentioned then was the Alpha Specials. How did the South Africans latch on to the fact that a standard Alfa Romeo road car engine could be turned into a good single-seater engine? Who first came up with this idea?
I think it was Sid van der Favre. Now, he was a marvelous mechanic. He'd been in the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve during the war, in the engine rooms of ships that were being escorted, on up to Russia and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There was an Alfa Romeo factory in East London, and in those days, unlike today, there weren't many sheer performance cars.
Yeah.
Alphas and Volvos you bought if you wanted something really quick.
Yeah.
Sunbeam Rapier. And Sid modified this Alpha engine, and de Klerk, funny enough, worked for him at the time. And it became very quick. There used to be British privateers that used to visit during the summer season,
Yeah.
and sell their old Coopers.
Yeah.
And Sid was able to beat these. It was Dick Gibson and Keith Ballasett and Derek Edwards, fellows like that, with his Alpha-engined car. It got so good that he was taken to Italy a couple of times for presentations, for his achievements.
Yeah.
And they were, even Sterling Moss and Rob Walker at one time, if you look in a very old Autosport, there was a rumour that Van der Wever was building them an engine for the 1961 season or 60 season, yeah.
Yeah.
So these chaps were clever engineers. And the other thing, the Alpha was, in those days you were recovering from the war years, so there was austerity around, and import duty on a Climax engine was prohibitive, where you could buy a crashed Alpha. There were plenty of them around. They were fast cars on tour roads at the time. And rob parts off it.
Yeah.
So the cost was the thing.
So, and one of them, there's a picture of it, and I must confess I can't find it at the moment. Some of the exhaust systems they fit to these cars were incredible.
Yes, that was a distinctive thing. Those engines were pretty robust in standard form and reliable in race trim. Yes, that exhaust was a thing of Van der Wever's, and it must have done something, otherwise he wouldn't have made it so.
Yeah.
But it also added an interesting aspect to the race.
Well, you put it this way, you wouldn't not be able to see it, would you? I mean, it was...
Yeah, that's exactly what I tried to put over here.
And I noticed at one section of the book, Jack Brabham was there, and he was extremely intrigued by looking at cars that at first he thought were his, and they weren't. They were copy Brabhams built by the guys in South Africa.
That's right. Doug Saruria he was probably the most important builder, the man of the LDS.
Yeah.
And at one time he'd bought a Cooper Mark III T45, but was unable to pay for it in the end.
Yeah.
And so he sold it to Van der Wever. But later, Doug bought his own Cooper, and he found that he could build a better car.
Yeah.
He did, when Jack Brabham came to race in 1960 with a Cooper Lowline, the car arrived in knockdown form, and the mechanic, Tim Wall, assembled it at the track.
Yeah.
And then while he was assembling it, Doug was there with a tape measure. Now, Doug knew the Cooper family quite well, so he was able to get corners and wheels and parts like that.
Yeah.
So that's what he did there. So his first cars were sort of Cooper copies. When I went to the 3-litre Formula, Brabham came out with a car, and Doug copied that, but it had Cooper corners on it. Now, many years later, there was a big story that Brabham threw his toys out the box and was furious with Doug. But when we did the book on LDS, I needed to get a foreword, and Graham Gould kindly got me in touch with Jack Brabham, and Brabham wrote quite a nice foreword about that, and he admired the skill of Doug in building a copy Brabham.
Yeah. Because one thing that seems to come across is a lot of the manufacturers like Brabham, Lotus, Cooper, when they saw the reproductions, want a better term, were actually highly impressed. And in many instances, the South African copy was better than the original.
I can't say anything about that, but it was a good, performed well.
Yeah.
If Saruria could have got or afforded up-to-date engines by that time, I'm sure his cars would have been even quicker.
Yeah. But, I mean, the other thing that's absolutely fascinating is the variety of, at the time, front-engined and rear-engine cars all racing together, because they hadn't seemed to have decided which was the better of the two formats.
Yes. The rear-engine revolution, obviously, that came about with the Cooper family. In Syria, what would it have been, 58, 59?
Yeah.
The local chaps had, just after that, as soon as the first real Cooper was imported, the chaps who were racing like sports cars like D-Type Jaguars, Turchero Jaguars, the various Lotus 15s and Lotus 11s, they all mixed in. That's why it was Formula Libra. But the rear engine car, a single-seater, soon just made them all obsolete.
Yeah. I mean, there's an interesting photograph on page 118, and it shows a Cooper, rear-engine Cooper, racing against a Triumph TR2. So the Libra series must have been incredibly varied over the time.
Yes, just to make fields. And they were real enthusiasts in those days. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, technological progress had marched forward, and those days of having TR2s and Austin Healey's and whatever, competing with upgraded 500cc cars, which had then been fitted with Porsche engines or Climax engines or whatever.
Yeah.
That sort of came to an end. And then you had these purer specials, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So a lot of the sports cars that were out there, were they mainly British sports cars that were in Africa at the time?
Yes, mainly British.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think. You had the odd, quite unique cars like Fairthorpe's.
Yeah.
Of course, the Healeys and TR2s and 3s. And in fact, that Austin Healey 100S, the very rare lightweight racing one, there was one or two of those about. You had the odd Italian car. No, there were a couple now I think of it. There was a 1952 Ferrari Vignale Special Spider.
Yeah.
The Count Mazzotto had won the sports car Monaco Grand Prix with, that found its way here. You had a beautiful Maserati 200S. And then there was a reputedly ex-Maria de Philippis Maserati A6 GCS that found its way here. Now, that was quite interesting because when it got to South Africa, it had the Maserati engine in, and the chaps decided to go and race in Rhodesia, a trip of probably 600 or 700 miles, and they towed it on a tow rope all the way. Unfortunately, it blew its engine, And the car that they towed it with was an Austin Healey that had a Chevy engine in it.
Yeah.
So they whipped out the Chevy engine, put it into the Maserati, and then raced that
Yeah.
for a while, a couple of important races, and then eventually on a very tight circuit, it met its end.
Now, another man you cover, and I have spoken to him. I spoke to him just over 12 months ago because he'd been in France at an event, is Brouch Neiman. And one of his Lotus cars that he raced had made an appearance in France, and he was invited over to be reunited with it. He sat in it, but I don't think he drove it. But I mean, he became quite a famous name in Africa, didn't he?
Oh, yes. Now, Brouch is still doing amazing things. He's about in his early 80s or mid-80s, and a year or two ago, he took his motorcycle and drove from the north of South America to the South America.
Yeah.
In racing, he started off as a mechanic in a highly specialized tuning workshop.
Yeah.
And the boss loaned him a Lotus 7, a very early Mark I Lotus 7.
Yeah.
And Brouch did a lot of things to that. He didn't have a limited slip diff, so he put on 2 handbrakes, one on each side.
Yeah.
He also narrowed the car and did various other things. And in fact, there's a legendary drive, was 62, the Ran Grand Prix. He qualified that car in a Grand Prix, and about a dozen proper racing cars, when I say proper, Formula One type cars, failed to make the grid.
Yeah.
So he was a legend, and he would put on mudguards and lights for the sports car race and then take them off for the Formula One race.
Yeah. But
yes, he was a very clever and very competent driver.
Yeah.
He drove for Wilmot in the UK in Lotus Cortinas at one time.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that does come across is a lot of the drivers or the special builders, when they were up and running and the car had been sorted out, when some of the big names, big racing names like Moss and Jim Clark, etc., came out to race there, I think these guys were absolutely stunned that something that had been built at home was nearly as fast, or at times faster than they were in a works car.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they were quicker than the works cars or the top line drivers, but at times these guys could be pretty competitive. But bear in mind, they never had up-to-date tires.
Yeah.
In those days, compounds were something new. A works team could run half the season on one set of tires. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Anyway, the locals would buy the second-hand used tires at the end of the season.
Yeah.
But the engines, like the Alpha engines of de Klerk and Van der Favre, were pretty competitive. I don't know if you know Des Hamel. He writes books on engines, a wonderful book, Coventry Climax Racing Engines.
Yeah.
And he, in fact, gave me a bit of information for the book very kindly. So the claims of horsepower that the locals made, they didn't have dynos and things like that, but they would take a car quietly in the early hours of the morning onto a public road and give it a blast to find out what jets to use and whatever. So those engines were pretty good of the top locals.
Yeah. Because there's one section where two guys building cars, the only power tool that they actually had was a 1/4-inch drill run from an extension cable from the house. I mean, their ingenuity was absolutely incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was de Klerk. They stayed in a seedy hotel, him and his friend who built the car, Pat Phillips, in a heavy drinking hotel bar for the mining clientele nearby. and just 44-gallon drums and a slab of wood over that. That's how they built the Alpha Special.
Yeah.
Of course, they welded the things themselves. They would borrow welding equipment from Doug Serruria or anyone.
Yeah. And it's like you said, excuse me, if a car had blew its engine, they thought nothing about putting a completely unrelated engine into the vehicle. And at many times, the unrelated engine would fare better than the engine it should have had in.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, just innovation or something like that. But then again, there were while there were successful cars, there were some dreadful, easy to say now, but dreams of builders, and what they built was a terrifying machine.
Yeah.
So you had the success and you had the failures, but if we didn't have the failures, you wouldn't have the winners making the grids.
And it's like you said, these guys, once they built something, they were out there. Nothing held them back, did it? They went out there. They worked on the theory that they probably wouldn't win, but they'd have a damn good try at doing it, and if not, get a decent finish. And these cars managed to last for 2 and 3 seasons, didn't they?
Yes, that was an interesting thing, the longevity of some of these cars. And interesting thing, when the builder driver, he got a newer car, he would sell the old car, and the chap who bought it would either break it or compete quite well with it.
Yeah. Now, just out of interest, I mean, as I said, most people who are keen on racing have heard of Kyalami, but I get the feeling there were a lot of circuits that are probably long gone in Africa at the time.
Yeah, down our way, before Kyalami, there was a circuit called Grand Central. It was an old airport.
Yeah.
A small little airport, but that they'd converted to a circuit. It wasn't very safe. So then that's the reason Kyalami was built.
Yeah.
Before that era, racing was like on public roads around the early industrial estates.
Yeah.
Or even on beachfront esplanades, which was very dangerous. East London, for instance, they raced around the city streets along the esplanade in the sea. At high tide, waves would crash over onto the track and cause some interesting accidents. And they developed, there was a Killarney in the Cape that became a decent track after they'd been racing once again at old airports.
Yeah.
Or on the access roads of old airports. And then in Natal, we had Roy Hesketh Circuit near Pietermaritzburg. That was built in 1953. They had before that run through Alexandra Park, which was just a city park, very dangerous. You'll see in a book curbing and whatever. And then Westmead was built, which was a top-class circuit. Unfortunately, it failed after 2 years. Because of attendance, there was too many tracks close by, cannibalizing the market.
So, I mean, what is the state of motor racing in Africa now? Because I must say, I don't see many reports of it. As I said, apart from the rallies, is there still racing in Africa?
Yes, there's still circuits. Killarney exists. Kyalami, which has been completely changed, but still in the same location, that hosts an international 9-hour for sports cars. There's a lot of historic racing, which is quite popular. plus various classes for modern saloon cars.
Yeah.
There's not obviously nothing like Formula One. That would be just too expensive now.
Yeah. And just to go back to the book, where did you find all these photographs? I mean, most of which have never been seen.
I borrowed and stole. Fortunately, the people I got to know very well, some of them had scrapbooks with photos that they gave me.
Yeah.
I would be a bit of a detective. I would look for people or families of people who raced and found out what they had. Before people gave me things, I knew a couple of top-class photographers.
Yeah.
And one of them gave me his archive, and another gave me a box of negatives. Of course, I had to then identify things.
Yeah.
And it just went on like that. So I still get people coming to me and saying, yes, we're clearing out the house. Father's died, and here's some books. We don't want to put them on the tip. Are you interested?
Yeah. So, I mean, it truly is fascinating, is this? I mean, what inspired you to write it in the first place? Was it to make sure the memories of these people and these cars, there was a permanent record of them?
Yeah, that's precisely it.
Yeah.
You know, the story had to be told. Graham Gould is a wonderful friend of mine, you know, the Scottish author.
Yeah.
And he once told me, you know, if you don't diligently record all this, it'll be lost forever.
Yeah. And what's the reaction been to the people whose family members are mentioned in the cars? Have they been as fascinated as I am?
So far, I've had very good reception on the book.
Yeah.
People who I've obviously know the families of some of the car builders and that, and I've given them a copy of the book, and they really liked it.
Yeah.
And other people have thought it very good. One of my quite a well-known author, I gave one to. He said it had the accuracy of an auditor. It was a good history lesson, and it read like a thriller.
Yeah.
So I thought it was quite good because it is a bit different. Yeah. You know, Mrs. Hanning, the lady builder, I thought I got to know her quite well.
Yeah.
And she was a wonderful mechanic designer.
Yeah. I mean, just out of interest, where did the little colour plates come from? Who did these? I mean, they look like little watercolours.
Oh, that's a good friend of mine, Andrew Embleton. He is now in Devon, living in Devon.
Yeah.
And an amazing collector. He had a collection of about 3,000 motor books, racing books.
Yeah.
He had autographed photos of, I don't know, 800 or so drivers from all over the world, and pre-war drivers, whatever. And
Yeah.
he used to do these lovely little watercolors and send them to the drivers to autograph, and then they loved those and would ask him for another one.
Yeah.
So that was something unique. And Andrew was one of the chaps who encouraged me to do this book.
Yeah. So, are there any more books within Rob Young?
Let's get this one out the way. I've got two other interesting ones that I've drafted. Still need to be finished off properly.
Yeah.
But for the moment, let's just get this one out the way.
Rob Young, all the best. I hope many people go and get this. As I said, it's called Special Brew, the story of the Southern African Formula One and Libra Specials. Forward by Gordon Murray. It's from Evero Publishing. It's absolutely fascinating. This covers an aspect of motorsport I knew nothing about. and the determination and the resilience of people to go racing with next to absolutely nothing to go and do it with, and the end results were phenomenal. So, Rob Young, thanks very much for joining me on The Backseat Driver, and thanks very much for having written this book.
Thanks, Mark. Great talking to you.